Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome to the channel. If you like the content I've put up thus far, please consider liking and subscribing. My channel is relatively new and it will greatly help with the growth and popularity of it. So in this video, this is going to be part 2 of my scripting prerequisites series. So this series is basically a part of what we would want or should know if we're going to start messing around with PowerShell scripts. So if you're creating a script from scratch, if you're looking at somebody else's script, just some things that are important to know. So this particular video, this part 2, we're going to be focusing on scripting constructs. So we're going to be talking about the foreach construct, the if construct, the switch, and the do while until construct, the different iterations of that. So let's switch over to our demo environment and have a gander here. So the first construct we're going to talk about is the foreach. Now the foreach construct, not to be confused with the foreach object commandlet, but the foreach construct allows me to work with an array, so a variable that's cast as an array, and be able to do something to each object in that array one at a time. Right? So this is very popular to see in scripts. If, for instance, you have a script that has multiple values in an array, a parameter that accepts multiple values, something along those lines. So let's first of all put something in an array here. So let's take, maybe we'll do dollar users equals, and we'll query Active Directory. So get 80 user. And my sample lab environment here is rather small. I think I have like 10 users in it, so I'll just grab all of the users, right? And now what we're going to do is we're going to loop through each user that is retrieved from there. So this would be cast as an array once it's run, and we're going to do something to each user. So let's go ahead and set up our for each. So with for each, you literally start off at the word for each. You have something in parentheses and then a script block, which is going to be the code you're going to run. So we have in the parentheses our variable that has the multiple objects in it, whatever is the array. And you come up with a variable that does not exist yet for each singular object that's in this array here. So if I say, dollar person in dollar users, right? And so then the script block, I'll split the script block up on multiple lines. That's a common thing that most people do when formatting PowerShell scripts. And let's say we'll just do something simple here. So maybe we'll do object processing dollar person, and I want to grab just their name here. So dollar person dot maybe Sam account name, and then close the quote. Right? And when you're accessing part of a variable in double quotes, you do have to surround that in its own set of parentheses and put a $sign on the outside of that. That's an element called a sub expression. And then we'll go ahead and watch this work. So let me go ahead and just run this, and we can see, oh, right object, my bad. That's what happens when you're typing and talking at the same time. That should be right output. All right. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so there we go. So we've processed the users in my lab environment here, and it's a huge amount, right? I've got a few folks in here. But if you notice, what it basically did here was running line 1 here, we grabbed all of the users out of Active Directory. So you have 80 user objects, put it in this dollar users. So that would be cast as an array. Now that array is loaded into for each. The first object in that array is put into this variable, which again does not exist before line 3. So line 3, you're creating that variable, and that represents a single object out of this array of objects here. And then once that is cast, then this script block is run. Now the script block can be one line of code, it could be 50 lines of code. There's no limit there. It's just a script block. Okay, and you could separate different things you want to do, different command lines on just different lines. So if I wanted to put another line in here and do something, maybe set 80 user script path, something, right? So you could put other things that you want to do there. You can make the script block as big as you want. Now, once the script block finishes running, then the for each returns back to $users, grabs the next object, puts it in $person, so $person gets recast, and then the script block runs again. So when you're using something like this, the script block is going to run however many times there are objects in this variable. All right? So if there's 8 objects in there, this script block is going to run 8 times. If there's 50 objects in $users, this script block is going to run 50 times. All right? Each time a different object is in here. All right? Now, what a lot of people do is they make this one be plural and then this one be singular. So like they'll do, $user in $users. And it doesn't have to be that way. They are separate variables. So you can do $person like I'm doing here. You could do, I don't know, dollar watermelon for all it matters here. As long as that variable just doesn't exist as of yet. So you're kind of creating that one on line 3 here. And that's going to be what a for each does in its simplest form, if you will. All right. So used a lot when you have a variable that is an array, has multiple objects in it, or if you're writing code that's going to take a parameter and you want to work through the multiple values supplied to that parameter, for instance. All right. So the next construct that we have in our arsenal here that we use a lot in PowerShell scripts is the if construct. Right? Now the if construct basically does a comparison. And for the comparison, it uses the typical PowerShell comparison operators. So like -eq, -ne for not equal, gt for greater than, ge for greater than or equal to, lt for less than, le less than or equal to, like could be another comparison that compares strings and will accept wildcards. Match would be another one that we could use. So there's, the typical PowerShell comparisons, and then what it does is compare something against something else. If it's true, a script block is run, and if it's not, the script block does not run. All right. So literally, let me just go right down to the console part here. If I just throw an if in here, so if 5 equals 5, all right, and then we'll throw a script block up here and we'll say, how about write output, this is true. Okay, so we do something like that. Now this comparison obviously is going to evaluate to true. Right? So that means this script block should run. Right? Close that wrong there. Okay, there we go. And if I run this, you'll see this is true. Now let me bring it back up and alter this. So is 5 equal to 4? Now that's going to produce a false. And you'll notice the script block is not going to execute at that point. Right? So see how it did not run. So with a if construct, you're basically creating a choice here. So so whatever is true runs and whatever is not true does not. Right? So it's just simple comparisons. Now you could also compare against the result of a commandlet, the value in a variable. You could do any of those things potentially. Okay, it's in essence the same kind of comparison that you find doing with other things. Like if we're doing the filtering for like where object, for instance. Okay? Comparisons pretty much are set up the same all around PowerShell. So you have something and then comparing it against something else, and then PowerShell evaluates it as true or false. Right? Now, with this, this would be like, you're doing something or you're doing nothing. Okay, when you just have a single if. Now you could also add on the end of that, you can add an else, which would be what you want to do instead. So let's do write output. This was false, and close that. Okay. So if we run this, you'll see that this script block ran. And let me bring this back up. Oops. Bring that back up. And then this time, we'll go all the way back here and we'll say, let's make it true again. And you notice that part ran, right? So in this way, you have something or something else, right? So you basically have a fork in the road. Like I need to do something. It's either going to do this or it's going to do that. So what determines it is the comparison, right? Now, with this, it's not often written like just one long line of code here. I mean, you could, don't get me wrong, but how it's typically written out in scripts with syntax is we start off with the if, the comparison, the opening of the script block, then carriage return it, tab it in, then we'll bring the closing of the script block down, have the opening of the else, tab that in, and then kind of like the closing, bring that back. Right? So it looks kind of like this. And the concept with it is if you're examining the code, you know that when you have an if, there's a script block, coming, if you will. And then all of the code vertically from the I in if down to that closing script block, that's your script block. So from the I down to the closing curly bracket there. And then same thing with else, there's a script block coming. So everything from here down to here vertically, is in that else script block. So I mean, granted here it's not that bad because it's one line of code, but if you have 50, 100 lines of code in a script block, it could be a little more challenging to tell where it's opening and where it's closing. So by keeping everything tabbed in, and then like if I had another line of code here, something like that, I would again keep it at the same indent mark. So I know that everything in here, because that's the blank space between if and then the closing curly bracket, is a part of that script block. Okay, so it makes it easy to see. Now, what if though you wanted to do something like you had three choices, so like three forks in the road, and you wanted to have comparisons kind of control that, if you will. So that's where you could get into adding in an element that's called an else if. All right, so let me go put that, oops, let me go put that in here if I can get my cursor back over there. Right. So we'll do an else if. That would open its own script block. Now, close that there. Right, and then we have, for the else if, we are going to need another comparison. So maybe we'll do 10, 10 equals 10, let's say. All right. And then let's see, in our script block, what should be the code in the script block? Maybe we'll do a write output. And I'll just call this else if, okay? Just so we know that that's the script block that kicked off. Okay. So if we run this, let's run this whole block of code here on its own. So go ahead, select it, and just run it. Oh, and typo again. Where did I typo? Oh, I did out. There we go. That should be output. There we go. Okay, so let's go select that again, run it, and we could see in the result right here that this script block is what kicked off. Okay. And then nothing else ran. So this was evaluated to true. It did this script block and then went on to whatever the rest of your script would have been. All right. So if the first comparison is true, this script block is the one that runs. Now let's say though that evaluates to false. Now let's see what happens. Now notice this time the else if kicked off. So this evaluated to false. So it went down to the else if, and that evaluated to true. So it ran this script block right here and then exited the if construct. All right? Went on to the rest of your script. Now let's say though that this one also evaluates to false. And let's kick it off again. And notice this is false is what we have left. Okay, so the else is what ended up running. Okay, so basically when you order them, when you have an if, else if, or an else, whichever one evaluates first to true is the script block that's going to run and then exit the construct. So the way that if it basically works here is you have, in essence, one script block that's going to run if some comparison evaluates to true. All right. So it's designed ideally when you have one comparison to do. That's kind of where if tends to run the best, if you will. All right. Now let's kind of revisit this where we had the for each. So with that, you can use one construct inside of another that's perfectly fine. So for instance, I want to use the if here because I want to introduce something in some of these constructs. I'm going to use the command continue. So let's do something like if, and let's say $person dot Sam account name equals administrator. So let's say that's my comparison. So if the username is administrator, um, what do I want to have happen? Oops, let's do that. Something like that, right? Um, so let's go ahead and run this. And let's see, do I still have the output from this before? Okay, so notice when I ran this before, administrator, my apologies there, administrator showed up. All right, so there is administrator. All right, now I'm basically throwing an if construct where we'll do person.same account name equals administrator, and then we've got this word continue, this command continue inside the script blocks. That's all I'm doing there. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. And we look at the results and notice administrator did not show up in the results this time. So what continue does is if you're in a loop, it exits the current instance of that loop and then goes back to start the next instance of the loop all over again. So basically what I'm saying here is if the user's administrator don't run the script block, go back and go to the next iteration of the loop, okay, the next cycle of the loop. Right? So that can be handy if you don't want it to run on some of the objects that might be in this array. Okay, so maybe I don't want the script block to run for all, all objects in that array. So continue could be an excellent one for that. Now the other one to know about would be break. All right, so notice if I run this now with break and I run it, notice how you see no results. Okay, what break does is it exits the whole construct, not the current level of the loop. Okay, and remember from my first result, administrator was the first user. Okay, so again, all the way at the beginning here, administrator is the very first user here. Okay, so that's the first object that's going to be in $person. So once the loop runs, the first iteration of the loop runs, administrators in $person, we get to this line and this evaluates to true and this says exit the construct. So the rest of the lines don't run. It would just go on to whatever the rest of your script was. Okay. So continue just exits the current instance of the loop. Break exits you out of the whole construct. Okay. So anyway, so that's kind of a use of break and continue and combining if inside of my for each here. All right. So the next construct we're going to have a look at here is the switch construct. All right. So with the switch construct, this is going to be something that's handy to use when you are doing multiple comparisons. All right, so let's say if we wanted to compare against multiple things. So let's say, for instance, I have, we'll do $names, and I'm just going to put some static values in here so you can kind of see what they are. So let's say we need some computer names here. So how about we do something like, let's see, I live in Connecticut in the United States, and the closest major city for me is New York City. So maybe we'll do NYC, and then we'll do computer names. So let's do DC1, and then we'll do NYC dash maybe client 1. Okay, so I've got a couple strings here. Helps if I can actually spell NYC. So I've got a couple strings that'll be loaded into $names here. Right? Now let's say, depending on what's in there. Um, Actually, let me just start with one value. Let's do that. Let's just start with one value. Depending on what's in there, I want something to happen. So I want to evaluate it maybe for not just one thing like an if construct, like if the name equals whatever. Maybe I want to do something else with it. So that's where the switch construct can come into play. So with switch, you can specify um, the variable you want to examine and the the variable, the element you want to examine. So it could be a variable, it could be the part of a variable, like if you have an object in there that has properties on it, like if it was $name dot, I don't know, first or something, if it had that as a property. So it doesn't have to be the actual variable itself. And then inside this kind of like outer script block, you're going to create a separate script block for each value that you want to compare against, right? So let's say we'll put a value in here if it's NYC-DC1. If it's that value, we're going to do this script block. So we'll do just a simple write output. It's a DC, right? And then we'll close that. And then maybe we'll do another choice here. And if the choice was NYC client 1, again, the concept here is maybe you don't know what's in that variable. So if it's this, we want to do this. If it's this, we want to do that. So it's a client PC. Okay, so something like this. Right now, we'll go ahead, select the code, and we'll go ahead and run it. And notice the script block that runs is, see the result right here, it's a DC. Right? So line 4 is the one that kicked off because obviously that matches what was in the variable, right? So now let me go change what's in my variable, okay, like so. We'll run the selection again, and we could see something else comes back instead. So in this case, that comes back. Now, let's say though it's whatever's in that variable is neither of them. Maybe it's a server, right? And let's go run this again. And notice this time you get no output here, right? So nothing happened. So with switch, you can actually have a default value as well, right? So there is a default choice if you wanted to do that, and you could put a script block to go along with that. Now, when I say script block, I'm just kind of for simplicity purposes keeping these script blocks to just one line of code. But I could potentially take a script block and just write it out on multiple lines, just like we were doing earlier. Okay, so I could have, split the script block over multiple lines of code if I wanted to do that. So that's kind of, in the cards to be able to do. Okay, so now on the default, let's just do another write output line, and we'll put that in here. It's something else. And oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so now see what happens here. I will run that and notice the it's something else line is what kicked off. Okay, so that's the output that we got. Right, so that's with switch, if you have some value and you want to compare it against multiple choices for what it could be and have code run based on whatever that was, right? So, like for instance, a very common usage of this is with if you're doing like menu systems, like if you want to put up a menu or something like that. In fact, if you kind of have a look at, I don't know, maybe old command line batch files where they use the choice um, executable to put up like a simple menu system, something like that. So for instance, let's say, let me, I have an old batch file here. Let me just throw this in the ISE. So let's say I have something like this. Now I know this isn't PowerShell, but again, you may find some of this out in the real world here, right? Where you have to maybe convert batch files over to uh, over to PowerShell scripts. I see it a lot of times with logon stuff. So let me just put this in Notepad here so it looks a little cleaner. Okay, where you have something of the, using the choice executable, and if they choose 1, 2, or 3, it runs different sections in here where you can say, hey, go to label 3, it goes down to here, and so on, right? So PowerShell doesn't support any of this. It doesn't support labels. It doesn't support choice. So what would the equivalent PowerShell look like for that? So let me just duplicate Notepad here, drag this one over, and look something like this. Let's make the font a little bigger. Go back to an 18 font, and it would look something like this. All right. Um, So you're using this variable to grab some integer. So you're putting something up on the screen that's asking the user to pick 1, 2, or 3, and running that storing that in that variable. And then in switch, it's loading that variable and saying, hey, if it's number 1, do this script block. If it's number 2, do this script block. If it's number 3, do that script block. All right. So now, if you compare that against what I did here, okay, why are my choices in quotes? Well, because mine are strings. So here, where they're grabbing their variable, they're casting as an integer. So that's why there's no quotes, right? So you still have the opening script block right here. And oops, I apologize. It's actually a mistake in my code. Uh, Need to close that right down there. All right. So let's see, that actually in action. So we can bring it in here. Let's delete that, paste this in, and make our console window a little bigger, run it, and notice it's asking me choose 1, 2, or 3. Maybe I choose number 2, and you chose 2. All right? So that's where switch can come into play. Now, switch, however, can have a few different iterations to it. Um, so, for instance, we could do wildcards. So on switch here, I'll tell it I'd like to do wildcards. And when you're comparing against strings, that can allow me to have partial matches. So let's do something like this. Let's do if it's NYC star, right? Output it's in NYC, all right? Um, so let's do something like that. All right, now let's select this and run it. All right, and notice we got that it's in NYC. So again, pay attention to what's in that variable. And then when I load it into switch, this one's matching because it does start with NYC, and this one is not. But because this one matched, the default does not kick off. Okay? Now, let's check out something interesting here. All right, let's put that in there and run. And notice this time, multiple matches actually ran. So that's the difference with switch. It doesn't exit the construct after the first positive match like if does. Okay, so if is, the first thing that's true, we run it and we're out of there. Switch does not work that way. So with switch, you have the potential to have multiple matches. So in this case, this one matched and this one matched. Okay, so both of these script blocks kicked off or ran. And again, because even just one of them ran, the default did not run. All right? So that's kind of one of the neat things with Switch is you could have multiple matches result. Okay. In fact, with Switch, you can put multiple values into that variable. It does not have to be just one thing. You can actually put multiple objects in there, both in that variable, but also the right in the parentheses. Okay, don't know why you might want to do that. I'm sure there's maybe a scenario out there, but you'll notice that select all of this again and run it. Okay, and notice for the first one, that was this, we got these two results. Okay, those are what happened. And then for this value, only this one kicked off. So that's where you just see that value right there. All right. So that is utilizing switch. So there's a few different parameters that go along with switch. So there is a wildcard, and there are a few other ones. Probably the one I take advantage of the most would be regex. You can throw a regular expression in there to match information as well. Right? So if you wanted to use something like that, so you're looking for patterns in strings, not the actual characters of the string itself. Right? All right. So now on to our last construct here, and this would be the do while until construct. Which the reason why it's phrased that way is there's a lot of different iterations to it. You could have do while, you could have while, you could have do until. All right? So a few different pieces to it. So basically, like let's start off here. Let's say I don't know, $A equals 1. Okay? So we'll start off with some value in a variable. and then let's open up a do. We're going to have a script block here, and then we'll have while, and then some type of comparison. So $A is less than 5, let's say. All right? So now, what do I want to do inside my script block here? Well, let's first of all write output $A, and then we'll increment $A by 1. Okay, so that's my loop. Right, that's my script block. Right, so that's what we're up to here. Right? It's not fancy, but that's what it is. Now let's see what the output looks like for this. So let's first of all clear my screen down here. Let's go ahead, highlight this code, and run it. Now notice you can see the running of it right here. And so we get, so $A equals 1. So we're now into the do construct. So the script block runs. So it outputs $A as 1. So that's this output right there. Then it increments $A to 2. So it was at 1. It increments it by 1. So that's 2. Now, the while determines if the loop repeats again, if the script block repeats again. So if the comparison is true, it'll loop the script block again. So in this case, is 2 less than 5? That's true, so the script block's going to loop again. So the next iteration of the loop, $A this time is 2, so that's what it wrote out right here. Right? And then we increment $A to 3. So is 3 less than 5? That's still true, so it runs the loop again. So it prints out $A, which is 3. So there's the 3 you see there. Increments $A to 4. Is 4 less than 5? Yup, that's true, so it loops again. So then we'll output $A again. So that's where you see the 4 right here. And then $A is now incremented to 5. So we're adding 1 to it, so 4 plus 1 is 5. Now is 5 less than 5? That's false. So the loop finishes. So the comparison coming up false exits the do construct. Okay? So that's one iteration of this. Now, what's important to note here is that the comparison comes at the end, not the beginning. So with a do while construct, you are guaranteed one running of the loop before the comparison happens. So this script block will always execute at least once, right, is how this works. Okay? Now, you could also, though, let me rewrite this a little bit. So let's say we'll take all of these elements here and just kind of move them down a bit. And notice what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this construct, I'm going to format it a little differently. I'm going to put the while at the beginning and nothing on the end. So in this case, we have the comparison happening in the beginning. Okay, so let's say, like for instance here, let's go ahead and run it. And remember the output from before, it did 1 through 4. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. And notice it still outputs 1 through 4. All right, so it's exactly the same as the output from previously. All right, so you might be thinking, well, it does exactly the same thing. No, it doesn't. The comparison happens up front. So notice if my value causes this to be false, the script block doesn't run at all. So check this out. So I'm going to highlight it, run it, and notice no numbers outputted at all. I see no numbers there. Okay, but let's alter the do while version of this. So I'm feeding it 5 to begin with, and notice if I run it, see how I get one running of the loop. Okay, so in that way they behave differently. So when you have a do while, you're guaranteed this script block to run at least once. Okay? Whereas if you just have while, the comparison's up front, so if this starts out as false, the script block here never runs at all. Okay? Now, there's one more iteration of do while, and that is do until. All right, so let's do something like this. All right, and we'll throw the word, we'll grab this, put that over there, and throw a do right there. All right, so do until is how this is going to work. Now, remember with before here with the do while, in the comparison, the true kept it looping and a false exited the construct or canceled the construct, okay? Canceled the loop. With do until, it's the opposite, okay? It's a false keeps it looping and a true exits it. So kind of check this out here. Let's start at 10, and we'll say if $A is less than 5, and for every time the loop runs, we'll take away 1 from $A. Okay, so let's do something like this. So $A is going to start at 10, and then it'll keep looping until $A is less than 5. Right, is how this reads here. Right. So let's go ahead and run that and give a little more room there. Go ahead and run this and notice now it's counting backwards. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. So finally, when $A is set to 4, is 4 less than 5? That's true. So it exits the construct. Okay? So we could do something like that. Now, um, so, but in real life, I really do not use until at all. If I need this to be a negative, I can actually work with the do while construct, believe it or not. Okay, so there's in essence another variant of this. So let's say I want this to behave exactly the same, but I want to use do while. So in your comparison, you can use the not operator. And then another set of parentheses. So you basically have the outer parenthesis that has not, and then the inner parenthesis which has your comparison. All right? And notice if I run this, it's exactly the same. So what's happening here is when you have a comparison, if you have the not operator outside of it, it returns the opposite of whatever the comparison is. So if this is false, the not returns true to your loop, to your comparison operator. Right? And if this is true, the not returns false. Okay, so it returns whatever the opposite is of what happens in the comparison. Right? So that's something that's commonly done. Okay, so a trick you should know about. Also, not can also be abbreviated, not just like that, but also just with the exclamation point. So that has a slang term or an alias of the bang operator, B-A-N-G. And if you notice, this will work exactly the same. Okay? Like so. Okay? So that's kind of your different iterations here of do, while, and until. Okay, so mainly, you have do while, and do until. And if you want to alter the do while to perform like a do until, you can use the bang operator or the not operator to return the opposite from that comparison if you wanted to do that. Okay? So that's a look at our four most common scripting constructs that you're going to find within most of these scripts that you're going to see online, as well as maybe the stuff that you're going to create yourself. It is not exclusive of all of them. It's the four that I find I use the most. There's also a for construct that's out there. I just didn't happen to go over with that. But these four, for each, if, switch, and do while until, uh, you can pretty much do most things that you're going to want to do within the PowerShell scripting world. All right. So, any questions, comments, queries, please hit the comments for the video. And if you did like the content here, please consider liking and subscribing. Like I mentioned before, my channel is still rather new, so that does help out greatly in getting my videos showing up in YouTube's search results and their algorithm, which figures out what to display. So thank you for watching and stay tuned for upcoming videos. Have a good one, everyone.